You pay for a house or a home or a flat, and then the second biggest ticket item is your car. You buy a car, and maybe you drive to work and back, and you shop around for 2.4 hours a day, and that's 10% of a 24-hour day, and therefore your asset utilization is about 10%. Your car, let's say, has 100 horses associated with it, it's a 100 horsepower car, engine, and the traffic speed limits posted are 60 kilometers an hour, but you actually are driving only at 6 kilometers an hour because of traffic and traffic congestion. So you're really driving at a tenth of the posted speed, and you're using your asset only for a tenth of its total available time. So your net asset utilization, the value there is about 100th of what you've invested in or what you thought you've invested in. So most people spend a lot of time agonizing over exactly what car to buy, what color of car to buy, how it should look, how many seats, what seat cover. But by the way, you're going to use it only for 100th in terms of net value of that entire investment. So, I mean, the question is that from a purely macroeconomic standpoint, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think the tools that we have ahead of us can really help increase the utilization of that asset. What I mean by that is you buy a car for maybe 5 lakhs and you have an agreement that you will actually share the one seat in front of you, beside you, with someone else, and that someone else will be identified maybe by Facebook or someone as a real good, tolerable person, not someone you don't tolerate. And so that person rides with you every day, 5 days a week, and all of a sudden your car now costs effectively 3 lakhs and not 5 lakhs. And by the way, the other person hasn't bought a car. There's no need for the other person to buy a car because that person hops on other cars based on some kind of a interesting tool that's available. And so that person feels they're riding in a car every day to work and back. And they also feel that, oh, by the way, they're not getting into a bus because for whatever reason they don't want to get into a bus. Maybe for them it's too inconvenient. But there's an interesting model that's already developed. They are riding in a shared private-public transport modality. I'm not sort of making this up out of the blue. These are entrepreneurs outside of the economic value system of the present car maker who are already doing this. So I'm not sure if anyone here is that kind of an entrepreneur, but many of us know people who have been working on shared private transport models, on models of renting out cars for an hour or two as opposed to a day, models that actually allow your car, your own car that you left behind, to be rented to some unknown person, provided obviously you get it back when you come back, but your insurance then transfers to this other person. So there's all kinds of interesting models from a business standpoint of how the asset can now be utilized more effectively. So that 0.1% asset utilization, or the 1% asset utilization now becomes 2% or 3% or 10%, and hopefully then moves up that value proposition. So I think the story here is not just technology. It's not just beautiful design, which has to be there, but it's also tacit in all this is also the economic considerations, both at the micro consumer level and at the macro sort of planetary design level. So I have a few more things to say. The interiors are nice. They're going to get better. There's no question about that. The story here is really, if you look in there, the gadgets that you see today, or the displays and the actual gauges that you see today in cars, the speedometer, the tachometer, those are essentially being transformed to electronic or software-based widgets. So you can press a button and you can get a tachometer to appear. You can press a button and that tachometer disappears and something else appears. So these are not in the future. These are products today. So what that means is that each of these gauge elements can start becoming sensors, sources for data, probes for data. So how you drive, where you drive, what your tachometer says might be pieces of data that you might have some direct value in being able to offer up to the cloud, if you will. And then you can start seeing aggregated effects of all that becoming sort of relevant. So I think this point here is really saying that a lot of what we do here is in the design of the automobile itself is to make sure that the driving of the automobile is safe, and that you have your eyes on the road and you have your hands on the wheel. And the big problem that we face from a design standpoint is not the design of the phone itself or the device itself at 0 kilometers an hour, but being able to design it for use at speed, at driving speed. A lot of the technology solutions you find today are terrific at 0 kilometers an hour. So if you have a server that's been designed for high-performance computing. It doesn't normally move unless you're in California and there's an earthquake, and in which case you've got to be prepared for, for some rumble and movement. If you have a phone, it's usually in the comfort of your purse or pocket in your hand. It's really sitting in a very comfortable environment. Maybe you drop it and it's designed for some drops, but it doesn't necessarily move at rapid speeds by itself and encounter other objects that do. So I think really the usability of these devices has to be tuned for the road, if you will. And that's a big challenge. So, there's the engineering challenge, there's a business challenge, there's a design challenge, not just in terms of appearance, but also in terms of usability. So it's user efficiencies and the efficacies of being able to design an interface that can present information just in time and not have you distracted, if you will. These are some U.S. numbers that may, I don't have the India numbers directly, but the mapping is not that difficult. So there's about 500 million commute hours that people spend in the U.S. roads every day. So you might, that's in part because of the number of people actually driving. So this is a pretty staggering large number. I think a broad brush approximation of what it is for the planet is about 4 times this. So you can look at something like 2 billion hours every week that humanity spends going from A to B and back from B to A, sitting in cars. So cars, buses, trucks, but that's a large number. That's a huge amount of time that's in some sense waiting to get repurposed to make that commute more, not either more productive or more relaxing, certainly more safe. So you can pick any one of the problems that face us as a society, as a member of society, whether it's safety or whether it's saying that you want to reduce gas consumption or reduce tailpipe emissions, or whether you want to, from an individual standpoint, want to be more connected but in a safe manner. There's really a huge amount of opportunity in a macroeconomic sense that's waiting for redesign, if you will. Again, I mentioned the number of cars. This is sort of everything's on the rise. If you look at sort of individual technologies, there's all kinds of ways in which cars are beginning to talk to each other. Electronics is, of course, everywhere. About 30% of the automobile has direct costs associated with electronics. Interestingly enough, about 90% of the features you see on the sticker sheet when you go to buy an automobile has things to do with electronics. Until recently, you thought that the tires had no electronics, but now you have tire pressure monitoring sensors. And so even the plain old boating tire is a little computer that's emitting bits and bytes. And so that's a really useful piece of information, and it can be repurposed in many ways. This is just an example of a little heads-up display. It's a simple heads-up display where you see this light illuminating if the car in front of you is slowing down or has stopped and you are in fact approaching it. Obviously, this wouldn't work if you're going at high speeds, but oftentimes you're just driving in a city and you're getting distracted or you're tired and you forget to hit the brake at the right time and you go and bump into the car in front of you. So this is at a slow speed on a street, you can get these alerts. But what really this represents symbolically is that communication is beginning to happen. That 2 billion that's coming together soon is going to be intensely networked in various forms. And so this then begins to start having new value. So from an information architecture standpoint, a lot has already been done. The cars, as I said, are platforms for interesting technologies to come together. In the case of communication technologies, there's a lot of built-in technologies, buttons, knob, microphones, loudspeakers. They then allow for, through the use of software and physical electronic interfaces, to support cell phones coming in and other devices being brought in, music players. But of course, our big concern is distraction. You don't want people to be looking at their phones and pressing buttons on their phones. So you want to be able to either voice activate the phones, press a button that's really designed for car use, like the buttons on the radio. So that piece is, again, sort of work in progress. But the information architecture is really important, again, to be able to tie in the second billion, if you will. These are just examples of services that are offered in cars, whether it's traffic and directions or the state of your vehicle, or whether you need roadside assistance. So again, these are natural things that come when you have a platform that's capable of doing that. But the network effect, again, I think is probably the most important aspect. When you have a billion of these happening, there's very good ways by which you can look at cars that in some sense are less efficient than others because they pollute more or they tend to break down more. You can start doing systemic things that can then make the roadways more efficient and then reduce congestion in an active sense. again, if you have the interface to the automobile ready, you can start doing very interesting things with people who you might have never thought of being part of your automotive, in this case, automotive value system. So if you had programming interfaces ready in cars, you can now work with other people's programming interfaces. In this case, Google and Ford talking about creating a better, more efficient path and path guidance, if you will, to improve the efficiency of that commute. Too. So in this case, there's many options you have to go back home. But if you'd rather drive back 15 minutes later and stop in a park, take a walk, and go back home, and you're going to only lose 5 minutes because there's traffic congestion, then that's a really useful piece of information to have in mind before you get going. And if your commute back home can include another person who also wants to take a walk, you get healthy, you save time being stuck in traffic, and of course you get back home in a predictable manner. So oftentimes, if you can't do something about congestion, you at least want to be able to predict something that's somewhat effective. This is an example of a product that's just coming to the market in the US. This allows you to mount a solar panel on your home roof, and then be able to charge your car so you can get about 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers of driving per month, which is actually pretty good. So obviously, this is not a high volume, high scale implementation. There's still a lot of physics and a lot of science and a lot of engineering efficiencies ahead of the road. But the point is, this kind of a discussion and a dialogue is now beginning to take a product manifestation in really, really interesting ways. In this case, you are really capturing energy off the grid. It's not part of your fossil fuel burn system, and you now have a mechanism of storing that energy, which you could do independent of the car, but you can now transfer that over to the automobile and have the motor in the car drive you for local commutes and things of that nature. And if you don't use it, of course, you can give that back to the grid. That's also sort of a debate and a story and a value proposition happening outside of the automobile system. So in this case, again, imagine as you progress towards the second billion, there's all kinds of interesting network effects in terms of energy utilization that take you outside of the fossil fuel chain of consumption of fuel. I mentioned this in various forms about how cars will start talking. There's lots of published work in this context. Jay, sitting here, was part of a lot of initiatives at General Motors. There's lots of work happening in a pre-competitive sense, and so plenty of work has happened in this area. I've sort of there's one interesting piece. Let me see if I say this here. Yeah, so I'll just get to this. So I think this is the second part where I want to spend a few minutes. And this is about how cars could be agents for cars. I gave you this example of a wiper blade piece, but there's one area that actually came to our attention in part because the car was becoming a platform. And this was being able to connect to services that had to do with health and wellness. So what if you had asthma? What if you had diabetes? What can the car do for me? And maybe nothing. But it turns out that if you get hypoglycemic, there's something that maybe the car can do, maybe give you an alert and that you want to get off. It's not the car itself becoming a medical device. We don't want to do that. That's not our plan. That's not our intention. But you might have devices, and people who are innovating in that space, in this particular case, a company called Medtronic has devices that measure blood glucose levels, that tell you that you're trending towards hypoglycemia. The vehicle can actually amplify that alert. It's not a bad thing for the vehicle to inform you that you need to get off your cell phone and pay attention to this hypoglycemia alert so you can go get a banana. It's the kind of thing that you can directly take action on and get back your blood glucose, if you will. So that's an example completely outside of the normal automotive value chain that says we can partner with people. Another firm there that I show is WellDoc. This is a company that does health care, lifestyle management guidance. So it really says if you're a diabetic, it sort of asks you what you had for breakfast and it nudges you to take a walk. So you got to be very careful about nagging someone versus sort of nudging someone. And these people specialize in that, and so they figure out you really want to talk to them for just a few minutes, and you don't even mind doing what they suggest. So it's sort of interesting. And again, the privacy of your car, the cocoon aspect of your car, can be used as an environment to communicate some of this. Of course, you wouldn't necessarily want to be riding with somebody else when you're doing this, but in the instances when you choose not to ride with somebody else, there's sort of guidance towards healthcare and lifestyle choices that can be made. And then you can go take a walk. And maybe the future of Chennai with lots of parks would allow you to take this detour, go for a walk, and then head home because you've got this little nudge on your way back.